Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Okay, again, good afternoon, everyone. This is a political education and community organizing session. We're going to be focusing on community organizing. And this particular session is titled How We Get It Done. My name is Brother Khalid Rahim from the NAIP, New African Independence Party. And so we want to get started. We're scheduled for about a 90-minute session, three different parts. The first part deals with community organizing 101. The second is how we get it done, part one. And the third is how we get it done, part two. After each part, there will be an opportunity for any questions or comments that people would like to make. I know many of you are seasoned community organizers and activists within your own right. So we want to provide an opportunity for people to share their perspective and their insight and their knowledge base about community organizing. So that being said, we want to get started. So just bear with me. I'm going to do a quick share screen so we can all look at today's presentation. And I just need to get a confirmation that everyone can see this. Can everyone see this particular screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, so we're about to get into the slide format and then we're going to start. Okay, so again, how we get it done. This is a general outline for making conscious, effective, and powerful community change. The original date for this presentation was February of 2018. It's been edited for this year, and we want to start. So community organizing 101. Let's talk about some basic definitions. And these are definitions that I've provided based on my years of research, study, and practice in activism. So community, a group, it has to be two or more with shared interests, values, geography or space, culture, origins, histories, beliefs, customs, and traditions. So shared interests, values, geography or space, culture, origins, histories, beliefs, customs, and traditions. So we have different types of communities. Again, we can have religious communities, spiritual communities. We can have communities based on ethnicity. We can have communities based on race. We can have communities based on gender. We can have communities based on geography. If we live in a certain area, we constitute a certain community. Those outside of that area belong to another community. So we have all different types of communities. We can have geographical communities that go beyond a neighborhood, a city or county. They could be a community of people from the Western Hemisphere, a community of people throughout the African diaspora. So we have all different types of communities, but the thing that binds it all together, again, each community has one or more of these connections, shared interests or values, shared space or geography, culture, a shared origin. We talk about the African diaspora, that's a community. Well, what makes it a community is that the shared origin, that these are people of African descent. We all no longer live on the continent of Africa. We live throughout the world, but our origin, we are folks of African descent. We could talk about communities based on history, people who grew up in a certain neighborhood. Those people share a common history of that neighborhood, having lived in that neighborhood. They can tell you all the stories about, you know, who lived here and what business was around the corner and who did what to whom back in what year. because they share a common history. Beliefs, customs, and traditions also are factors that help to define what constitutes a community. So let's talk about organizing. Organizing, creating, identifying, gathering, mobilizing, structuring, and facilitating resources in order to accomplish specific goals and objectives. So that's the way that I would define organizing for the purposes of this particular session and for the purposes of the work that we do as the NAIP and the work that many other people do throughout the neighborhoods and the different communities that we come from. So we talk about organizing, again, creating, identifying, gathering, mobilizing, structuring, and facilitating resources in order to accomplish specific goals and objectives. So oftentimes people confuse organizing with mobilizing, and they're not the same thing. And, you know, I'm sure it's something that we can talk about a little bit more.
Okay.
So, you know, when you're organizing, you're pulling things together. You're creating things. In some situations, you have to create the resources. You have to identify the resources that you need. You have to mobilize people and mobilize resources, and you structure stuff and you facilitate a process involving those resources in order to accomplish the goals and objectives. So again, organizing, creating, identifying, gathering, mobilizing, structuring, and facilitating resources in order to accomplish specific goals and objectives. I'd like to ask folks if you could put yourself on mute. We don't want to hear background noise. Thank you, I appreciate it. So moving on. So let's talk about the contemporary roots of community organizing within the United States. So most traditional, excuse me, just one moment, I need to let someone else in. Okay. Most traditional studies and curriculums which teach modern day, say from the 20th century, ideas, concepts, and practices of community organizing begin with an examination of a gentleman named Saul Alinsky. Now, Saul Alinsky was an organizer from Chicago who became famous for his work and theories around organizing poor and working communities in pursuit of social justice. Now, Saul Alinsky, he lived, you see, I have a note, he was born in 1909 and he passed away in 1972. He is oftentimes credited with being one of the founders of modern day community organizing. And he did a lot of work throughout Chicago, and a lot of his theories and ideas became very popular as far as organizing working class communities and working class people to push back against the powers that be around issues of housing, issues of social welfare, quality schools and education, and so forth and so on. And so I think this is very important for us to, you know, just to kind of lay this out here, because for those of you who may go on to study social work, if you go to most schools of social work around this country, they oftentimes have a few distinct academic tracks that you can pursue to become a official, licensed, accredited, or degreed social worker. And so they may have a track that focuses on being a clinical social worker, dealing with family practice, for example, being or being a social worker working within the institution where you provide services to people who need help, say within the criminal justice system or within a social welfare agency. And then there's another track where you will be trained to be a community organizer, right? Here in Pittsburgh, at the University of Pittsburgh, and I think in a couple other universities in the Pittsburgh area, they offer that particular track where you can go to the School of Social Work and you can pursue a master's degree or get a PhD where you focus on community organizing. And oftentimes, at the very top of that curriculum is the study of community organizing as articulated and as theorized by Saul Alinsky. So again, Saul Alinsky was an organizer from Chicago who became famous for his work and theories around organizing poor and working communities in pursuit of social justice. He was of European origin. And again, he was born in the early part of the 20th century, and he passed away in 1972. So I think we need to recognize that, and we need to recognize him and his work and his contributions to the ideas and theories of community organizing through the prism of what we now define as social work. But I'd like to also get into the deep, rich history of community organizing that existed before and after Saul Alinsky during the same time period in the early 20th century throughout the latter part of the 20th century. And so these are some examples of contemporary roots of community organizing within the Black or New African communities. And I tried to list these in chronological order just to give us a better sense of how things develop, and also just to provide an idea as to how everything is interconnected, that all of us stand on one another's shoulders. None of us have been independent in terms of the knowledge and the skill sets that we've been able to develop, that we all have learned from someone else. We all have been taught by other people. And many of those people we never met. Many of those people we will never meet, right? But because of them, we now know what we know, and we are now able to do the things that we do. And so again, these are some examples of contemporary roots of community organizing within the Black and New African communities. So let's look at Booker T. Washington in the beginning of the Tuskegee Institute, and that was in 1881. Then we get the National Urban League, and many of us are familiar with the Urban League as we know it today, but the Urban League started out in 1910 and was one of the premier groups of organizations that took on the responsibility of helping Black people, especially those Black people who were trying to find their way from the South to the North, making sure that they had the necessary things that they needed in order to make this transition in terms of housing, employment, and like the basic necessities of life. Then we get Brother Timothy Drew, that many of us know as Noble Drew Ali, and he founded the Moorish Science Temple of America, and that was in 1913. That was founded up in New Jersey, I do believe. And then a year after the founding of the Moorish Science Temple, we get Marcus Garvey, his first wife, Amy Ashwood Garvey, and his second wife, Amy Jacques Garvey. They were instrumental. Marcus Garvey was instrumental in founding UNIA, but his wives were instrumental in developing UNIA and making it the largest Black organization in existence to this day, as far as a social justice, civil rights, economic development, independent Black organization. To date, there has been no organization larger than the Universal Negro Improvement Association under Marcus Garvey, Amy Ashwood Garvey, and Amy Jacques Garvey. And in 1919, in response to the racist violence that had become so prevalent that particular year, and a couple of years afterward, as a result of so many brothers, mostly brothers, Black men who were coming back home from World War I, who found themselves being attacked by racist, violent mobs. I'm sure many of us over the last week or so have heard a lot about what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. And well, what happened in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma is an extension of what had been going on since the end of World War I, when many Black men were returning home from the war and found themselves, even after having fought for so-called freedom and democracy abroad in the name of the United States of America found themselves, upon returning back to the United States of America, still subject to racist violence and to white supremacist violence, and found themselves being attacked, found their churches being burned to the ground, their businesses being burned, men and women being murdered and raped, children, being attacked and brutalized. And so as a response to all this violence that was going on, there were many, many confrontations that happened in 1919 and 1920 and 1921. There was a new group that was formed by a brother named Cyril Briggs, and this group was called the African Blood Brotherhood, or the ABB. To give you an idea of what the ABB was like, think of the ABB as the precursor to the Black Panther Party and to the Black Liberation Army in certain ways. And this was in 1919. And then we get a sister who had been a former member of Garvey's movement, and later on she started her own. And actually, when you do the research, you'll be shocked to find out that her organization was probably the second largest Black organization to ever exist here within the United States. Her name is Minnie Maud Lena Gordon, and her organization was called PME, or the Peace Movement of Ethiopia. Someone had raised their hand. Could you put your hands down, please? We're not taking any questions until it's time after we finish the section. Her name again is Minnie Maud Lena Gordon, and her group is called the Peace Movement of Ethiopia. And she founded that particular movement in 1932. And then 2 years later, in 1934, we get Elijah Muhammad, who assumes the leadership of the Nation of Islam. And then from the years 1951 throughout 1965, we get the rise of Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, who provided leadership within the Nation of Islam for 12 years. And then in the last 2 years of his life, he provided leadership and direction for the organizations that he helped to found, MMI, which is Muslim Mass Incorporated, and OAAU, which is an Organization of Afro-American Unity. And then in 1955, we get the courageous work of Joanne Robinson, who was a professor from one of the local Black universities in Montgomery, Alabama, and a sister that all of us know, Rosa Parks, and then a brother named E.D. Nixon. Those three, along with Martin Luther King, and I should say those three selected Martin Luther King because that's exactly what happened, but those three were some of the main players in the creation of what is called MIA, or the Montgomery Improvement Association, which led to the largest boycott by any group of Black people up until the Ferguson, Missouri boycott. So that was in 1955. And then we get the creation 2 years later, as a result of the success of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, we get the creation 2 years later of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC. And it was actually conceptualized by Bayard Rustin and some other people. And Martin Luther King originally was not the person who they had thought would basically be the leader for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It actually was another brother whose name I can't recall, who basically declined. And I think he suggested Martin Luther King, and some other people suggested Martin Luther King. And so King became the first leader of what became known as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It went through a few different name changes before they finally settled on the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. But it was Bayard Rustin's brainchild for the most part. And I think that's very important to keep in mind. He also was one of the main brainchilds behind the so-called March on Washington later on in 1963. But the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, was created in 1957 through Bayard Rustin, Martin Luther King, Ella Baker, keep that name in mind, Sister Ella Baker, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, and Reverend Joseph Lowry. And then in 1960, we get the creation of what was to be known as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. And actually the person who was the main force behind that was Ella Baker. The students that came together on their own, but originally it was the SCLC who sort of was pushing that the group of students become the student wing of SCLC. And Ella Baker, she intervened, and she basically said, you know, that wasn't a good idea, that the students need to have their own group and organization and be autonomous. They were more involved in direct action, like sit-in demonstrations and restaurant counter protests and demonstrations and sit-ins. And they were very active as young people who were college students. They were on campus. And so Ella Baker provided the organizational leadership for them to be independent. And that's how SNCC really came about. So as you can see, Ella Baker played a key role in two major, as a matter of fact, she played a key role in a few major groups of organizations throughout what we call the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. But we'll just focus here on her role as one of the co-founders of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, as well as one of the co-founders and the main thrust as far as being independent for the creation of SNCC. Then we get Sister Fannie Lou Hamer and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party that came about in 1964 as a challenge to the Democratic Party in Mississippi, which when there was the Democratic Party's political convention, national convention held in Atlantic City in 1964, the Mississippi Democratic Party's delegation featured all white people, mostly all white men. And so Fannie Lou Hamer and others, they created an independent political formation called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and they challenged the seating of the all-white Mississippi Democratic Party in Atlanta. And, do your own research. That was an historic move for many, many reasons. Then also in 1964, we get the creation of Deacons for Defense. We know the Deacons for Defense were a group that was made up of former veterans of World War II and the Korean War. And basically their job was to protect the Black community, but to protect especially the civil rights leadership. And oftentimes they would accompany civil rights leaders and they would participate in marches, not so much as direct marches of demonstrators, but to provide security as well. And they also provided personal security for certain civil rights leaders. And then we get the first Black Panther Party, which was the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which was founded in 1965. And that was influenced through SNCC members, namely Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture. And then a year later, we get the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, which later on became known as the Black Panther Party, which was founded in 1966 by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. And even the name, the Black Panther Party, again, they got permission from the Black Panther Party in Lowndes County to use the name, the Black Panther Party, and to use the symbol. And then we get, and this is very important, last but not least, and we talk about community organizing, we talk about defining communities. We understand that communities and community organizing, it can go beyond the community that you may be physically or geographically most attached to. And so we look at the great community organizers and the influence that they've had beyond the walls of incarceration. George Jackson, who was a revolutionary, a Black revolutionary who happened to be incarcerated, who had a profound impact on what we call the revolutionary prison movement in the early 1960s and throughout the 70s through his teachings, through his writings. I would suggest people read Soledad Brother, The Prison Writings of George Jackson, for example, or read Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. And then we get Brother Jalil Muttaqin, who was incarcerated from 1971 until 2020. He was just recently released. And Jalil Muttaqin's contribution as a community organizer and activist was not just his ability to organize other prisoners or inmates behind the walls, but the influence that he had in helping to organize different communities and put together different groups and organizations outside in the street. For example, the Jericho movement, the National Movement for Freedom for All Political Prisoners. And I would suggest you read some of his teachings as well. And then Brother Russell Maroon Schultz, who's been incarcerated since 1972, and the work that he's been able to contribute, not just within prison, the countless cadre within prison that he educated and organized, the people who he taught and educated, who came home, who continued to be educators and activists and organizers themselves because of his influence and his shaping of different ideas and theories about what it means to create and transform the current society into a new society. And last but certainly not least, Brother Mumia Abu Jamal, who's been incarcerated since 1982. Again, an example of someone who has been able to go beyond the physical, geographical boundaries of what would be defined as his particular community. And he's been able to influence other communities to grow and to develop and to challenge the powers that be for justice. So again, I just wanted to give some examples of contemporary roots of community organizing within the Black and New African community. There's a lot here. I think there's a lot that we can really get into. We have a deep, rich history of being community activists and organizers in our own rights. I also think we need to study Saul Alinsky as well. I think there's a lot that we can learn from there. There's some good things there, and there's some things there that deserve some serious critique. But I also thought it was important that we look at our own history because we have a lot to stand on. And many people today in 2021, many people today who call themselves activists, and especially those who call themselves community organizers, believe me, many of them study the things that we're talking about. Many of them study and they've read the teachings of George Jackson. They read and study the Black Panther Party and how they did things. They definitely read and study about the SNCC, the Student National Coordinating, or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or later on the Student National Coordinating Committee, because the name did change. Personally, I'll share this, that in my humble opinion, many people, especially many young Black people who consider themselves to be, militant and revolutionary, they look to the Black Panther Party as an example of perhaps how to get certain things done, or they look to the Black Panther Party for the inspiration, maybe not necessarily the technique, maybe not necessarily a blueprint, but certainly for the inspiration. And I think that's commendable. But in my opinion, during that era, the better community organizers came from SNCC. As a matter of fact, the members who were people who were part of SNCC, who later became members of the Black Panther Party, they brought a tremendous contribution within the Black Panther Party. They helped the Black Panther Party to be better at what it did, because the people from SNCC, they were courageous, they were brave, they had a lot of experience. You're talking about people who had organized deep in the belly of white supremacy throughout the South. They had worked with sharecroppers and tenant farmers. They had worked in the urban communities throughout the South at a time when it was dangerous to even whisper that you wanted to register to vote, let alone actually go somewhere and try to vote. And it was almost unthinkable that a Black person would even consider running for public office. And so these were some brave, courageous young people who became very good at organizing. And they suffered tragedy, they suffered loss. And so when that cadre entered into the ranks of the Black Panther Party, for example, they brought a tremendous amount of experience and insight as far as organization and as far as how to get things done. So what we like to do now is take a break and answer any questions and entertain any comments that people may have. So I'd like to stop the share, if you don't mind. And someone had raised their hand. If someone had some comments, anything, this would be a great time for us to have some discussion. Someone had raised their hand before. I see the hand is still up. If you have a question, or let me see, I guess you can unmute, if that's possible. Well, if you have a question, could you put it in the chat? So again, if you have any questions, if you could put it in the chat, and we'll try to answer the questions as best we can. And if you have some comments as well. So again, someone had raised their hand, but I asked them to hold off until we finish with this section. Okay, so we can come back to you at some other point. So now we want to get into the second part of how we get it done. Brian, were you raising your hand? Did you have a question or comment?
Oh, no, I was sorry, wiping my nose.
Oh, okay.
You can make me a co-host if you want, if anybody else comes in.
Okay. All right. All right, just a moment. Tasha, how are we on the time?
We're pretty good, maybe pushing behind 2 minutes.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right, so let's get back to the share screen. Thank you all. Okay, so we're going to this section, how we get it done, to part one. So we need to identify the problems and issues. Then we educate ourselves in the community. Then we build community consensus. Then we create a set of demands. We strategize. In other words, what is the plan for getting the demands met? And then we have to be tactical, which means what steps and tools are needed. And so again, we need to identify the problems and issues, educate ourselves in the community, build the community consensus, create a set of demands, strategize. In other words, what is the plan for getting the demands met? And be tactical. What steps and tools are needed? So we identify the problems and issues. So this, say, for example, you know, this is just a generic list of some of the problems and issues that are oftentimes identified by folks within our community. Community violence, jobs, or lack of jobs, or well-paying jobs, economic development, white supremacy overall, racism, police brutality, housing and homelessness, education, the criminal justice system, and healthcare, physical and mental. So these are some of the issues that are generic issues that are oftentimes identified within our communities. So we have to educate. We educate ourselves in the community. And that means we do your homework. You do your homework. In other words, just don't run out there and bust out there because you feel a certain way, or emotionally you feel drawn to a certain direction. Do your homework, do the research, study, ask questions of the people in your family, people that you know, friends, ask people around your neighborhood, ask people from your community, ask people who hold positions of authority and power. Don't be afraid to do that as well. Ask questions. And then do some additional research. Look into the local laws and look into the governing documents. In other words, if you're having certain issues around how things operate and function within your community, within your district, within your jurisdiction, your city, your county, do some research, ask questions, find out what some of the governing documents are. For example, here in Pittsburgh, in Allegheny County, they have a charter, right? You know, you have the Allegheny County Charter, right? You have the Pittsburgh Code, right? So look into the governing documents, the documents that basically specify and lay out how things are supposed to get done. If you're having some issues within your district, say when you're within your city council district, then go do some research. Call the city council or call the city governing body, call your city council person, and or call the office and ask for the documents that specify how things are supposed to get done, right? Do the research. Don't go into things with no sense of direction. And also educate yourselves about the institutions within your area, whether they're the councils, like a city council or county council, where there are different commissions, like a Sports and Exhibition Authority Commission. It sounds, I mean, that's a mouthful, but that Sports and Exhibition Authority basically governs what happens with the sports stadiums in your area, or at least in our area up here in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, it does. And, they can raise money to improve the stadium. They help to raise money to build a new stadium, and they hire people. They control the contracts in terms of the vendors and, who's going to get paid and who's going to be able to be a vendor. Maybe one of your issues might be that, there are not enough Black vendors at the football stadium or at the baseball stadium, and you want to do something about that. Maybe there's a group of Black people who have some businesses and they want to be able to get contracts working at the stadium. Well, do your research and do your homework. Executive offices, right? Well, your local mayor is an executive. If you have a county executive, hey, the name says it all. He's an executive. Your state, your governor is an executive. So if you're having state issues, county issues, local city issues, or township issues, do some research. Find out what's happening with the executives within your particular government. Who's who, what's what do they do? How much authority do they have? What kind of power do they really have? And maybe you may be surprised that, especially on a local level, every mayor, for example, doesn't have the same type of authority. Every mayor doesn't have the same type of power. So, a mayor from one city may have authority over your school district in terms of the budget and everything else. And the mayor in another city may not have that authority. That authority may lie in the hands of the school superintendent and the school board, and not the mayor. So, do your homework, do your research, and find out what's going on. One of the tools that we have developed within the party is what we call a community assessment form. And this particular form, helps us to learn more about the particular communities and the districts from which we operate and from which we hope to impact. And it's real basic, you first of all, you have to define the type of municipality. Is it a township? Is it a borough? Is it a school district? Is it a city, or county, or state? And then the name, and then the general population. And then you do the breakdown of the population by race, whatever that means: Black, white, Hispanic or Latino, Indigenous, Native, Asian, Pacific Islander, Arab, or Middle Eastern, or other. And then we go into some other demographic breakdown by gender, and then a median income, and then the unemployment rates. The income is for the general population, and then the Black median income, unemployment rate for the general population, and then the Black unemployment rate, the poverty rate for the general population compared with the poverty rate for the Black community. Just off the top of my head, oftentimes what you will find in most cities across the United States, most urban areas, urban cities throughout the United States that has any substantial Black population, even a small Black population, oftentimes what we find is that the unemployment rate for the Black community is always double that of the white community. And that's been a pretty standard fact for several decades. So if the unemployment rate for the white people, if they say, yeah, the unemployment rate here is 5%, and that sounds okay, 5% is not too bad. Dig a little deeper, what you'll find is that the unemployment rate for the Black community is probably 10% or more. And then the unemployment rate for Black youth oftentimes is sometimes 3 to 4 times the unemployment rate for non-Black youth, especially white youth. So if the unemployment rate for white youth in your area is 15%, don't be shocked or surprised to find out that the unemployment rate for Black youth in your area could be anywhere from 30 to 50%, which means that when school is out, 30 to 50% of the Black kids in your area don't have any summer jobs, right? And that may account for some of the other stuff that you may see happening in your community. We look at demographics like age, children under 17 is very important, and young adults, 18 to 34, adults 35 to 64, and those of us who are 65 and over. We also push that people, dig deeper in terms of the local government, town, township, borough, city, county, or parish, which is a term that's used throughout Louisiana. Does it have the following? Does it have a council, a mayor, commissioner, chief executive, a city manager, or county manager? I know this stuff can sound overwhelming and overbearing at times, but please, you have to do the research. You have to do the homework. You have to know the enemies. And you have to know the adversaries. You have to know the opposition that you're going to be battling against. I can tell you from personal experience, for example, we wage campaigns to call for police accountability. And so we're marching and demonstrating, in front of the local police station, and which was not a bad idea. But what we didn't realize is that there was a public safety committee that supposedly was entrusted, right, with providing oversight over the police, right? So instead of just marching against or marching in front of the police station, we should have been finding ways to identify the members of the public safety committee for that particular municipality and go after them, right? We can still march, do the public march in front of the police station, but we need to be targeting the members of their public safety committee, or we should have been targeting the representatives of the FOP who always defend the police when they do all their dirt, right? Or targeting the attorney for the FOP who represents those police officers, or the law firm that represents the FOP in our area. So there's so many things that we should have been doing in addition to just marching in front of the local police station, but we didn't know that at that time. And so I'm just trying to put this out here now so you guys don't make the same mistakes in areas that many of us made years and years ago. And so we had to learn a lot of this stuff through trial and error. And again, just to form, this form, it asks different questions like, who is a political or executive representative for your organizing area, right? In other words, for your organizing area, if you're trying to organize some stuff within the city, and it's a town, township, borough, or city, well, the executive representative, the political representative who has executive power would be your mayor. If it's a school district, it would be a superintendent of schools, because the superintendent of schools is the top executive for the school district. If it's the county, it would be your county executive, or it would be, if you have a commissioner system, it would be your county commissioner. If you have more than one commissioner, it would be your county commissioners. And on the state level, your chief executive would be your governor. So some of this stuff seems kind of simplistic, but believe me, a lot of us don't know. And many of us are too prideful to admit that we don't know. And so we got to move past our pride and actually put the time and energy into understanding the systems that we're fighting against and understanding who our enemies and adversaries and who the oppositional forces really are, so we could be much more economical in how we deploy our resources in terms of who needs to be targeted, who needs to be targeted more, who needs to be targeted less, who needs to be not targeted at all. Okay, moving on. We need to build community consensus, very important. So, you know, we've identified issues, we've done our research, we've done our homework, we have a better idea of what it is we need to be fighting for, what we need to be fighting against. We need to build consensus, you know, because we can't act like Don Quixote and run out there like a lone knight, you know, think we fighting a dragon, we really fighting windmills. And if the people know we ain't fighting nothing but a windmill, and we think we fighting this righteous war against dragons. We have to build consensus. We have to make sure that what we've identified as a real issue is something that resonates with the community as a real issue. It may be a real issue in our minds, but it may not be duty swap to the community. Or something that we think is petty may be looked upon as highly significant within the community. So, you know, we may say, well, we need to organize self-defense groups so we can fight against the police. And the community may be more focused on the traffic light being set up around the corner, because that's where the kids always cross the street going back and forth to school, and 2 or 3 kids have been injured. And so their concern is with the traffic light, you know, not organizing self-defense groups to avoid war against the police, right? That may come a little later on, right? But right now, we need to be paying attention to what the community really, really wants and what the community has identified as a priority for them. Now, that doesn't mean that we would dismiss our overall analysis about the need to defend our communities. Yes, it's there, it's real, but right now we need to get that traffic light set up, because that's a step in the right direction, building the community's confidence in themselves and building their confidence in us as representatives, right? As organized leadership, not leadership, organized leadership. So create a set of demands. Now, if you recall a few steps back, and I'm gonna refresh your memory. Here where it says identify the problems and issues. So we've identified these problems and issues. This is a generic list: community violence, jobs, lack of jobs, poor paying jobs, economic development, white supremacy in general, racism, police brutality, housing and homelessness, education, criminal justice system, healthcare, both physical and mental. So we've identified this generic set of issues and problems and issues. So as we become more organized, because this is about community organizing, we move forward. We've done all this other stuff. We're building community consensus. And now we're creating a set of demands based on that previous group of issues and problems that we have had identified. So for example, we talked about the community violence. Well, now maybe one of our set of demands would be something like, number one, funding for community violence prevention and intervention programs. We identified some issues around jobs. So maybe we could have a demand such as number two, livable and sustainable wages plus benefits. And number three, protection for the right of workers to unionize, right? So again, these are concrete demands that reflect the issues that we've been able to identify based on our interaction with the people and with the community. So let's go down. We're going to focus on, from this set of demands, we're going to zero in on number 7. I'm sorry, we're going to zero in on number 8. Number 8 is community control of the police. And we're going to zero in on number 8 from this moment moving forward, because I want to use this as an opportunity to demonstrate and illustrate to people how we were able to get certain things done here within the party over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. So we're going to focus on number 8, community control of the police. So strategize. strategize. What is the plan for getting the demands met? We have to set goals. We need to do training and preparation. We need to identify the targets. Again, identify the targets, right? If you identify the wrong targets, that's a recipe for disaster. If you don't identify any targets, that too is a recipe for disaster. It's almost like a military type of operation. You know, you're shooting at the wrong people, or you're shooting at no one at all. You just closing your eyes and pulling the trigger. So either you identify the wrong target, so you didn't shock the wrong person, right? Or you identified no targets and you just close your eyes and start squeezing the trigger. Both are recipes for disaster, right? And I hope I'm not offending anyone by using these type of metaphors. You know, I know that many of us have went through very traumatic situations around gun violence. That's just the first thing that came to my head. And if it offends anyone, I really apologize. But strategy, again, strategy is planning. What is the plan for getting the demands met? Setting goals, training and preparation, identifying targets. Those targets could be individuals, organizations, institutions, or policies. Setting target dates, setting dates to get certain things done, setting dates to focus on certain targets. You know, setting target dates could mean either one or both. Gathering and deploying resources, fundraising, recruiting people, you know, recruiting some of the basic things that you would need, and then deploying those resources, putting those resources to work based on the strategy and also based on the tactics. In evaluation process, you know, after every struggle, every battle, large or small, we always have to engage in an evaluation process, right? To see what went well, what didn't go so well, to see how we can improve something, to see if it had the desired impact, to see if we could do it better, to see if we could be more effective, or if we could be more like efficient. Effectiveness and efficiency, two different things. They should go hand in hand, but they don't always go hand in hand. So you have an enemy, you were able to effectively defeat that enemy. At what cost? Let's talk about, you know, let's not talk about cost in terms of human life. Let's just talk about cost in terms of dollars and cents. So you had an enemy and you were able to defeat your enemy at the cost of $10,000. It cost you $10,000 to defeat this enemy, right? Okay, so were you like effective in defeating the enemy? Yes, you were. You were like effective. You defeated your enemy. But what you find out later on, when you're going through the evaluation process, is that if you had did things differently, you could have defeated the same enemy for half the cost. So instead of $10,000, you could have defeated this enemy for only $5,000, which means that even though you were effective, you were not efficient, because efficient means to get the most bang for your buck, to get the most out of the resources that you have. So some of us can be effective, but we're not very efficient. We waste a lot of resources, and not just monetary resources. We waste the most valuable resource, which is our time, right? So we waste a lot of time. I go back to what I mentioned earlier, when, you know, years ago, you know, just to use that example, you know, we're protesting against police brutality. We're marching in front of the police station. And, you know, we got certain things done, but what we didn't realize is that we should have been contacting the people, the chairperson and other people who sit on the public safety committee. We should have been marching and protesting in front of the office of the FOP. We should have been marching and protesting in front of the law firm that represents the FOP. We didn't do all that kind of stuff. We learned how to do that stuff years later. So did we get certain things done? Was it effective? Yes, right? But was it efficient? No. It took us longer to get it done, and we, you know, wasted time and wasted energy and wasted resources. So again, evaluation processes are always important. So strategize. What is the plan for getting the demands met? Goal setting, training and preparation, identify targets. The targets could be individuals, organizations, institutions, or policies. Setting the target dates, gathering and deploying the necessary resources, and constantly engaging in an evaluation process. So you can weigh whether you've been effective or not, and you can weigh whether you've been efficient or not. And be tactical. So we talked about strategies. So now we're going to talk about tactics. Be tactical. The different strategies to plan. The tactic is what are the steps and tools. So be tactical. What steps and tools are needed? And so to your left, you'll see just a list of some things that we have used. Again, going back to what I wanted to zero in on as far as a set of demands or issues. We wanted to focus on dealing with the police, holding the police accountable, right? And so we talked about strategy. Let's talk about the tactics. Again, the tactics, the steps and tools that you need. For those of us who know something about sports, I'm gonna use a sports metaphor, a series of sports metaphors. For example, football. So, you know, your strategy is, well, your goal is to literally win the game. Your strategy might be, well, we got a good running back, but we got really good wide receivers. So, and we got a good quarterback. And so we're gonna use our running back to get us, you know, off maybe the first 10, 20 yards. And then we're going to use our wide receivers and throw that ball down the field. And then when we get close, we're going to use our running backs to get us over the goal line so we can score. And if we do that enough, based with our defense, which is a good defense, then we should be able to hold the opposition to a few points and we should be able to outscore them. Okay. So the strategy, the steps and tools are your tactics, right? So you use your wide receivers, you use your running backs, you use your defense, you use all that stuff to win the game, to score, right? So we have to be tactical. Which steps and tools are needed? So we have a list here. If you look to the left, press conference, press release, series of community forums, because of the work that we're trying to do around holding the police accountable and community control of the police. We can't do it alone as the NAIP or New African Independence Party. So we have to build what? We need to engage in coalition building. So we need to build coalitions. We need to build working relationships and principal relationships with other individuals, groups, and organizations in order to garner the necessary support and power, right, to not just put this demand out there, but to make sure that it's going to happen, community control of the police. And we need to utilize tools like social media, and we need to engage in some direct action as well. And we're going to have to be involved in electoral politics. You know, maybe we need to identify some people who can run as candidates who will support some type of referendum or some type of bill calling for more control of the police. Maybe we need to exercise some political, you know, coercion via our votes over people who currently hold office, and basically send them a message that if you don't support this, if you don't vote for this, we won't vote for you, right? And then we need to engage in petitioning as well, where we basically can start to circulate petitions, right, seeking public support for this whole notion of community control of the police, right? So, you know, these are some of the things that we can engage in, and some of the things we should be engaging in terms of steps and tools or tactics. Now, if you look to the right side of your screen, just to give you an example, we had started this campaign around creating a civilian police review board for Allegheny County. And so you can see here, this is a news article, this is an interview, and this is a news article that was based on an interview with Brother Doug and myself. This is in front of the public library in one of the boroughs in Allegheny County that we had used on a regular basis to hold our community meetings, right, around a civilian police review board. We also started a petition drive, and you can see this is the petition here. where we petitioned and we got signatures and we got buy-in from the general public. So there were some people who came to the community meetings, and we had, we held these community meetings for several months, went into years of community meetings. And there were other people who signed a petition as well. So these are just two examples of how we pursued this whole struggle to create the Civilian Police Review Board for Allegheny County.
Excuse me, Brother Khalid, we're at 25 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so before we go on, we need to entertain any questions or comments that people may have. I'm gonna stop the screen share. And if you have any questions, any comments. Okay, all right, so if you don't have it now, think of it, some things you want to put out there for later on. So now we're gonna get to the last part. Okay, so how we get it done. This is the second part, and this is the last section for this particular class. So how we get it done. Mobilize, we inspire and motivate the people. Organize the people to do the work. Advocate for demands to be met. Agitate against oppositional forces. Demonstrate and protest current and future violations and injustices. And negotiate the degree to which demands become policy that empowers the people. So mobilize, that word mobilize, and word mobilize is so important. I mean, mobilize, root word mobile, moving, getting off your butt, moving around, being mobile, mobilize, inspire and motivate the people. Organize, you organize the people to do the work. A lot of people confuse mobilization with organizing. They're not the same thing. You can mobilize people, you can make a great speech, right? And you can get people hyped up and they can be mobilized. You could call for a march and demonstration and people will come out. They'll march and demonstrate against police brutality. They'll come out and march and demonstrate against homelessness, against gentrification. They'll come out and march and demonstrate against unfair labor practices or unsustainable wages. So they'll come out, they'll march, they'll protest, they'll demonstrate. That's mobilizing, which is a good thing, which we need to be able to do that. But after the march and after the protest and after the demonstration is over, then what, right? Because the demands still haven't been met. Situation still hasn't changed. People's consciousness has been raised. People's energy has been elevated, right? People are much more aware of the issues, and perhaps you've been able to recruit some new people into the forces of folks who want to see some change through your mobilizing efforts. But now you recruited these new people. Now what? You're right. They're not organized, and so at some point that energy starts to dissipate. Right? And at some point, people go back to business as usual. And then they wait for the next tragedy or the next event. And then you get the same people, you may recruit some new. So it's not just about mobilizing people. Most importantly, it's about organizing people. It's about organizing the people to do the work, organizing people into units where they can actually get things done, not just march and protest against police brutality, but how do we organize ourselves to challenge and to stop police brutality? And so this is a major part of getting things done. Mobilize, inspire and motivate the people. So this is from 2015 when the Fraternal Order of Police had scheduled an annual convention on the same anniversary date as the murder of Michael Brown up in Ferguson, Missouri. And so we had a series of meetings. We organized a protest and demonstration against the FOP convention, which was held in downtown Pittsburgh. And so we had protests and counter protests and demonstrations, which started up on the hill in front of Freedom Corner And then we proceeded to downtown Pittsburgh. And so this was the group that we had put together through a series of community meetings, which was called the National Mobilization Against Police Brutality and the Fraternal Order of Police. So again, mobilize, inspire, and motivate the people. And we organize. So this is a press conference that we had on the Hill, right outside the library up on the Hill. And you see a lot of familiar faces, members of the party, and a lot of people who were not members of the party who came out, people from other groups or organizations who came out. And those two events were the beginning and the nucleus of how we, started to work even harder and harder and harder around pushing for the creation of a civilian police review board for Allegheny County. So organize. So we started to organize the people to actually do the work. And part of that was we had several community meetings. So you can see this was called a community conversation concerning a civilian police review board. And this is just one of many, many, many flyers that we had. We usually had these meetings every month. And it got to the point where we had the meetings will be held on the second or third Wednesday of each month. So this was a meeting that we had. By this time, we had a Facebook page, we had a Facebook group page, we also had a blog page. And advocate for your demands to be met. This is a photo of a rally we held in downtown Pittsburgh in front of the county courthouse, right? Again, pushing this whole thing about the creation of a civilian police review board for Allegheny County. And this is an example of the demand statement that we finally presented to Allegheny County Council in September of 2018. I'm gonna read some excerpts from it. Quote, on behalf of the Committee for a Civilian Police Review Board of Allegheny County, I would like to thank Allegheny County Council for passing the initial resolution, creating these public forums and providing a mechanism for community input and expertise and facilitating the process for developing what we hope to be a comprehensive countywide board. So this came about because we pushed Allegheny County Council to actually institute a series of community forums. We have been holding our own community forums as the Civilian Police Review Board Committee. Then we pushed the county to follow suit, and they officially held a series of community forums in about 3 or 4 different neighborhoods throughout the county. So, so this is what we presented to Allegheny County Council officially. We define who we are, a group of individuals, organizations, and so forth and so on. Our statement of purpose to educate and engage the community, the citizens. Now we define community as the citizens and residents of Allegheny County, not just the citizens, but the residents as well, concerning police misconduct and ways to remedy the situation. And part of our statement of purpose is to serve as advocates for the creation of a civilian police review board and to facilitate the process for its creation and make sure that such a board is empowered with all the necessary instruments needed to hold police accountable, such as investigatory and subpoena power. To advocate and demand that such board composition is also representative of those communities which have been disproportionately impacted by police brutality and misconduct. And we define those communities as the Black community, other communities of color, young people, students, people from the LGBTQ community, and perhaps some others that we have failed to mention. But based on our research and based on our history and our personal experiences, we knew that those particular groups oftentimes are the groups that are most targeted by the police, and they suffer the most oppression, and they are at the receiving end of the most violence. And so we had concerns and recommendations that would focus on 5 areas: jurisdiction, the scope of authority and power, the structure, the composition, and the process. And so we laid out our argument. This is our demand statement, right? And we gave some historical context. We noted with over 100 police departments throughout Allegheny County, representing over 130 different municipalities, there's a clear need for standardized and comprehensive oversight of policing. We made it clear that we're advocating for a countywide board that would have jurisdiction over all police departments, including the county police, the county sheriff's department, the housing authority police, the correctional officers, as well as the port authority or transportation police. And we made it clear that this is for a board that represents the interests of all the residents, not just citizens. And then we stated the basis for this demand. As our county and region continues to grow, we will attract many more visitors and workers, students, teachers, and technicians coming from various parts of the world and areas of the United States. We want to respect their rights and guarantee due process for them as well. Hence, we call for a civilian as opposed to a citizen review board. Then we went into the scope of the power and authority, and then the structure, and then the composition. Basically, countywide board that has both compelling investigatory and subpoena powers based on our observations and research. We contend that any board lacking these essential characteristics is really not worth the effort taken to initiate it. We also advocate for a board empowered to accept and process complaints of police misconduct, monitor and audit police conduct and procedures, recommend both policy and corrective actions as well. In the structure, we wanted a 15 member review board, basically, to be parallel to the 15 electoral districts in Allegheny County. And because I know people often raise the question about the law enforcement being part of a board, so we pushed back against that and said, okay, cool. We said each district would have a board representative. The 2 at-large districts would be represented by former law enforcement people in order to benefit from their experience and nuanced perspectives. However, no relatives of any currently elected officials would be permitted on the board. And per our statement of purpose, we advocate and demand that the board composition be representative of those who have been disproportionately impacted by police brutality and misconduct. So in other words, we were advocating for a board that was a real board made up of real people, not a whole bunch of academics, not a whole bunch of professional social service people, but real people, right? In this instance, we talk about Black people, people of color, low income people, women, youth, immigrants, and members of the LGBTQ community come to mind. The people who have been most impacted and beat up, beat down, and murdered by the police in our county. We demand a review board that promotes and practices transparency and public accountability. A key characteristic of such a process requires that the board be established as an independent entity, not subject to the politics of incumbent, elected, or appointed public officials. And so this was our set of demands. And so I thought it was important to present this so you could see for yourself what something would really look like. You go through everything that you go through, you identify the issues, you develop a set of demands, you have the consensus, you do the mobilization, you do the organizing, you do the protest, you do the advocacy. And when you present your case, you have to present your case in a polished way. You can't be raggedy. It goes back to the very beginning. Do your homework or do your research. Agitate against oppositional forces. So this is a picture of us in front of the city county building. And this was from 2019, I do believe, because this was actually up to vote in 2019 the first time. And we actually were defeated. It was voted down, but we were there strong. And as you can see, we have different faces now. Most of the people you see here were not part of the original initiative. Most of these people came later on. Matter of fact, the young white woman you see there actually became a candidate for county council, who, when she campaigned, she said she would support the Civilian Police Review Board, and she won, and she did support it. So demonstrate and protest current and future violations and injustices. And this is just a graphic, or this is just a photo of the numerous people who have been murdered by the police all across the United States of America. From George Floyd to Sandra Bland to Ahmaud Arbery to, just on and on and on and on and on. And negotiate the degree to which demands become policy that empowers the people. So Allegheny County Council finally passed the bill on April the 27th of this year. They passed the bill on April the 27th of 2021. You can go and you can check it out for yourself. This is the PDF, and you can see the actual bill that they passed. Now, here's the thing. When you look at the bill that they passed compared to what we had demanded, it's like, So something was passed, but it wasn't what we had originally demanded. And oftentimes this will be the case. And so what do? We negotiate as much as we can. We had certain people on county council who supported us. The young woman who I mentioned before, Bethany Hallam, she was campaigning for county council position. She won, along with another candidate who also was campaigning for county council. She won as well. And they both, during the course of their campaign, pledged their support for a civilian or citizens police review board for Allegheny County. And they kept true to what they had campaigned on. And so when it was time for them to vote, they voted for it. But this whole thing became more like a circus between 2019, August 2019, into April of 2021, when the bill was finally passed. There was so many twists and turns, and so many hoops and loops that we had to deal with, from the politicians to the police, to certain activists. It just became a mess, but it's something that we learned from. So again, we got to keep learning. So, okay, so the bill was passed. We tried to negotiate as much as we could, not having the power to negotiate directly with the county council representatives. We could only continue to mount the public pressure and the public awareness that we had built over the last several years since we had initiated this campaign. And some of the issues and struggles were, once again, we had opportunists, community activists and organizers themselves who were opportunists, who jumped on the bandwagon at the last minute, or who jumped on the bandwagon late in the game, and who wanted to claim it and use it as political capital to further their political careers. And that's what some of them actually did. And they did it to the detriment of those of us who had originated this whole initiative. And it just became like a circus type of atmosphere. But you can't be disheartened, and you can't become dismayed, because this is what happens in these type of situations. You would have to deal with all types of contending forces. Some people will come at you and they will present themselves as being on the same side. Some people will be on your side only to the extent that it can further their own political career, or they want to get some shine within the community. And some people will be on your side because they really believe that it's time for something to happen. So, we have to deal with all types of contending forces, people who want power, people who want exposure, people who want opportunities to make money. I mean, there's some people who now have lined themselves up to get funding to process complaints around police brutality, right? So, and these were some people who started out with us. We actually recruited them and brought them into the process with us. They were not members of our party, but they were members from the community. And so you will have people who are opportunists of all types and all stripes and all colors, right? And all genders. So don't get fooled. Don't think that, it's some white guy who's going to try to trick you, or some white woman. It'll be some black guy, some black woman. Or don't think it's going to just be straight people. It'll be people from the LGBTQ community too. It'll be people of your same faith, your same religion. It could be anybody, right? Who will be coming into these formations trying to use it for their own personal ends, right? So just be aware and be conscious, and don't become discouraged and don't become dismayed. Just keep fighting the best fight that you can. And so the struggle continues. We have to engage in a critical assessment of the process and the outcomes. So basically, a lot of what I just said, we have to continue to engage in a critical assessment of process and outcomes. What was the process, right? Was it the best process for us over a period of 5 years? Okay, and look at the outcomes. Are the outcomes satisfactory? Are they beneficial to the people? Do they really translate into power, all power to the people, or power to the people, or community control of the police? And we have to continue to engage the individuals, institutions, the systems, and the structures, right? So just because they passed the bill, that don't mean we just go silent. Right, we have to continue to engage county council. We have to continue to engage the FOP. We have to continue to engage the people from the community, all those people, institutions, forces, and factors that have anything to do with dealing with the police and making sure the police are controlled by the community. And we have to continue to monitor the impact and the results of this campaign, monitor the impact. right? So, you know, next year we need to see, well, has there been a decrease in the number of complaints against the police, or has there been an increase, right? We need to monitor. Okay, well, I mean, what's happening? Do we have more police districts who have opted into this program, or are they still, you know, resistant? So those are the kind of things that we need to look at. So I think this is the end, and we're now open for any questions or comments.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate how people kind of jump on the bandwagon and try to clout chase and redirect the whole campaign. But
Yeah.
at least we keep it moving
Mhm.
and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We do the best we can. Any other questions or comments? We're on schedule. It looks like we can probably allow ourselves to go on for another 10 minutes or so, since we had to wait. We started off a little late, but I think we're pretty much on schedule. We're on target. Any other questions or comments? Any other perspectives?
I do have a question, Brother Khalid.
Yes.
I'm wondering, like, in a in like Allegheny County, where we have so many activist groups, how do we form a coalition so that moving forward we can present ourselves better? Because I'm wondering if our demands sometimes, like, we're not being heard, because there's a lot of groups that, like, the powers that be, feel like they may have to listen to, or work with each group with different sets of demands. Like, how do we bring that together here in Allegheny County? I just feel like we're scattered as a people. And you speak about organizing and coalitions. Like, is it possible? I guess not so much how, because that's a big task, but do you think it would be possible?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's always possible. I think it can be done. I think one of the biggest obstacles to um, having principled unity is the fact that so many individuals and so many other groups of organizations led by these individuals are unprincipled. And I mean, I hate to say it like that, but it's the truth. They're unprincipled.
I agree.
So all it really takes to send them in another direction is a little bit of money, you know. And in some cases, not even money. Sometimes it's just exposure. Some of them just want publicity, and for publicity, they will basically sell out the community's interests. But if you throw some money at them, many of them will sell out the greater community interests, and then they'll try to fool themselves and fool the community into thinking that even though they got sold out, they're doing it because they still love the people, and they really about this movement, or they really about so-called social justice, as they like to call themselves, social justice advocates. But we have weak leadership, and we have compromised leadership. And so when you have weak leadership and compromised leadership, ultimately what you have is a weak organization and a compromised organization. And so, like we always teach, individuals make up organizations, organizations make up movements. So if you have groups of weak and compromised individuals who lead groups of weak and compromised organizations, what you're going to have is a weak and compromised movement. And that's what we have. That's what we have here in Allegheny County. And that's what we have here throughout the United States of America, to be quite honest with you, when it comes to the Black community. We have relatively weak and compromised individuals, organizations, and they have weakened and compromised our movements. That's why oftentimes we're not taken very seriously, because the powers that be know, for example, I mean, just if you look at here, like in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, if you have $1 million, you can basically control the so-called social justice movement here in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County with just $1 million. $1 million. If you take $1 million and give 10 of the prominent groups $100,000 each, you got them. You got them. Matter of fact, you could probably control it with $500,000. If you gave them all $50,000 each, you got them. You can control their narrative. You can control their messaging. You can control their leadership. You can control their strategy. You can influence how they move tactically. I mean, that's the reality of it. Okay. we were talking about the tradition of community organizing within the Black community, and I had posted that up earlier, and I'm gonna post it up again because I think it's worth looking at again because I want to illustrate something very, very important. So just give me a moment. I'm gonna do a screen share. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Okay, so some examples of contemporary roots of community organizing within the Black and New African communities. What you see here, you see a lot of independence. Actually, you see a lot of self-determination and independence. You see a lot of people who had principle. They were principled. They had backbone, right? They stood by their beliefs. They didn't take money from the powers that be on a regular basis. Some didn't take money from the powers that be at all, and they were hated because of that. They pushed back against the popular narrative concerning the Black community at that time. They really fought for justice and freedom and liberation, right? So you look at the Moore Science Temple of America. You look at the Universal Negro Improvement Association. You look at the African Blood Brotherhood, which organized armed resistance to the white supremacist violence of their day, right? You look at Sister Minnie Marlena Gordon from the Peace Movement of Ethiopia. You look at Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. You look at Malcolm X. You look at Rosa Parks and Sister Joanne Robinson and Brother E.D. Nixon when they organized the Montgomery Bus Boycott, and they started an organization called Montgomery Improvement Association, right? White folks hated them. White folks threatened them. The powers that be threatened to shut them down. Some of them, man, I mean, they came under severe attack. People lost their jobs. Okay, sisters and brothers basically decided to walk to work rather than catch the bus. That was a bold, brave, courageous move. And then other brothers and sisters, they organized amongst themselves so they could have people transport one another to work, right? They didn't call on the white folks to help them. They did it on their own. And then there was some white folks of conscience, they did help them, but the majority of the work and the organizing effort was done by Black people. You look at the Nation of Islam, whether we agree with the Nation of Islam, from a theological perspective or not, right? The Nation of Islam's great organization in terms of expressing Black self-determination, right? And discipline. Same thing with Marcus Garvey and UNIA. You look at Fannie Lou Hamer, Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, in 1964 to go against the Democratic Party of the United States, to go against Lyndon Johnson and say, nah, this Mississippi delegation does not represent Mississippi because Mississippi is not all white and it's not all white men. It's Black people who live in Mississippi too. And we want to be represented politically. So we started our own political thing. And now we are here at this convention. You got to have courage to do that kind of stuff. And you got to be uncompromised, right? When you are weak and when you're compromised, it will show. It may take a little while. It may take a little longer, but eventually it will show. On a personal note, one of the reasons I'm not too upset about some of the more recent developments that have occurred within the NAIP is because I've learned from experience that people will show you who they really are. All you have to do is wait. If you can hang around, if you're patient long enough, they'll show you. And once they show you, believe them. Don't doubt them, believe them. Okay, so yeah, sister, I just want to demonstrate to you, that a lot of this here, based on our history, based on our traditions, we have people who had courage. We had people who would not give up. We had people who would not compromise. We had people who pushed back against the grain, right? They didn't sell out for $50,000. right? Like I said, in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, if you come up with $1 million every year, you can control the so-called social movement, social justice movement in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County every year with just $1 million. Matter of fact, I go out even further and say you don't even need $1 million. If you got $500,000, you can give 10 groups of organizations $50,000 a year, right? And they will basically do everything they can to not be revolutionary. They may use revolutionary images. They may use some revolutionary rhetoric from time to time, but you can best believe they ain't gonna really buck that much against the system. So the other thing that is very characteristic amongst these different groups and organizations and movements that I've laid out here is that many of these people suffered not just economic pain and financial pain, they made sacrifices, but many of the leaders and some of the members actually went to jail. They were incarcerated, right? So you look at what happened with Marcus Garvey. He was deported and incarcerated. He was incarcerated, then he was deported. You look at Elijah Muhammad. He was incarcerated in federal prison because, number one, it started because the Nation of Islam started their own school, right? They started their own school and they refused to send their children to the public schools. And so that's how they first got attention from the government. And then when World War II broke out, they refused to participate in World War II. And Elijah Muhammad himself said he was not going to fight for the white man or the white woman in World War II. And he instructed his followers to do the same, to not fight. And so because of that, they were labeled as draft dodgers. They were labeled as disloyal to the US government. And Elijah Muhammad was incarcerated because of that, I think, for about 4 or 5 years. A lot of people don't know that. He was a political prisoner. And then we know the story of Malcolm X. He was incarcerated as a young man who was involved in street crime, but then he became politicized through the Nation of Islam while he was in prison, right? And then when you talk about the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, well, let's talk about here. Let's talk about Montgomery Boycott Group, Montgomery Improvement Association. We all know what happened to Rosa Parks, right? And we know that Martin Luther King, who also was part of this and also part of SCLC, he was incarcerated on numerous occasions, not for long periods of time, but on numerous occasions, right? And then the members, the young people who belonged to SNCC, not only were these young people incarcerated, they were beat up, brutalized, in some instances murdered because of their work. Then you look at Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer was beat to like, you know, the brink of her life, losing her life. And she was beat, and she documented that, and she talked about it when she gave national testimony, right, in Atlantic City in 1964, right? So, you know, these people suffered, right? Not only was Fannie Lou Hamer beat to almost to losing her life, but she lost her job. She had been a tenant farmer sharecropper. When she got involved with the civil rights movement, the white folks told her she couldn't stay on the land no more, and she didn't have a job anymore. Right. The Deacons for Defense. When you know what happened to Deacons for Defense, they armed up to go to fight against the Klan. The original Black Panther Party from Lowndes County, right? They were threatened all the time about how dare you Negroes start an independent Black political party, right? So Stokely Carmichael in there. And then you know about the Black Panther Party. We know what happened with the Black Panther Party. So many members of the Black Panther Party, number one, were killed by the police because they fought back against the police. And then members of the Black Panther Party were rounded up, criminalized, incarcerated. Some are still in jail after 45 and 50 years of incarceration. Some left the country and still live out of the country. They've been living in exile for the last 50 years. And some have lived in exile and died in exile, right? And then we talk about Brother Jalil Muta King. George Jackson was murdered in 71. Jalil Muta King was just released after 49 years in jail. And Brother Maroon is still in prison, and Brother Mumi is still in prison. So I'm saying, you're talking about people with backbone, courage, and heart. So when you have compromised, weak leadership, then you're going to have compromised, weak organizations. You're going to have a compromised, weak movement. Because again, like we teach, individuals make up organizations, organizations make up the movement. Any other questions or comments as we start to close out?
Thanks for that response. That was very thought-provoking.
Well, I want to thank you all for dedicating and spending some of your time this afternoon. It's a beautiful day up here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The sun is out. I'm almost ready to sing the Temptation song, but I'm gonna let it go. I don't want to like torture you guys anymore. All right, well, I want to thank you again. We will put this on YouTube, you know, for the benefit of the greater community and for the benefit of any members of the party who did not have an opportunity to be part of this political education and community organizing session this afternoon. So I want to thank you all again. All power to the people, free the land. Look forward to tomorrow. We're going to have a quick and fast organizing meeting, a regular scheduled one at 8 o'clock p.m. Okay.
All power to the people.
All power to the people, free the land. Sister Chandra, Brother Brian, give me about 15 minutes. I'd like to talk with you guys at about 3 o'clock. All right.
So you gonna call on the phone or you gonna do it on here?
We could just get on the phone.
Okay.
Real quick. All right. So I'll talk with you guys about 3.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Peace.